And a very happy Monday to you at 12:07 in the West. It's the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wang's in Culver City.
John, over the weekend at a photo op for Shine LA, Karen Bass's effort to clean up the city before all the fancy sporting events come, she was asked by a constituent taking a selfie if, with the looming budget deficit, she'll be taking a pay cut.
Can I get a picture?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Can I get a picture?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Let's see,
Are you
I
going to
think
be
you're
taking?
gonna-
Are you going to be taking a pay cut to help the budget?
Absolutely.
That was loud.
Huge shout out to our buddy Daniel Gus who got me this sound.
Let's see,
Are
I
you going to
think
be
you're
taking?
gonna-
Are you going to be taking a pay cut to help the budget?
Absolutely.
You are. Well, maybe what percentage?
Well, we don't know. We'll have to see. Thank you.
Absolutely, I'll take a pay cut. How much? I don't know.
That was so passive-aggressive.
She's not taking a pay cut.
Of course not.
They all should take pay cuts, and they should all have to take Metro.
Well, let's not lose our sanity. Janice is the only one who enjoys taking the Metro.
Love the bus driver.
800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. Well, like Santa Claus knows if you've been naughty or nice, Randy and I, well, we know how you all behaved this weekend. And even though you all acted horribly, we're going to surprise you with a treat today anyway, because we have some fresh Katie Porter sound for you to enjoy.
Every single day, I do a Google on the YouTube to see if Katie Porter is actually doing anything with her gubernatorial campaign. And as of this weekend, she's had her first interview in months.
Well, there you go.
On a podcast on YouTube that nobody really watches unless you're super tuned in to like left-wing politics. But I'm subscribed to it because Alex Michelson has this guy on his show every once in a while. His name is Brian Tyler Cohen. And I brought you all of the questions that didn't have to do with Katie Porter or what she thinks about the Trump administration, because shockingly, on this podcast, she was asked about state issues.
It's crazy that you go on a national political talk show and they're the ones that ask her about state issues, whereas when she's here in California, all she wants to talk about is Trump.
Well, what's interesting is, like, for this host specifically, this guy lives in Los Angeles, so there's a lot of problems here.
Okay, well, then he's aware.
And I feel like a lot of the podcast world, especially on the left side right now, has like a free pass to criticize California based on that Ezra Klein book.
And because I think most of them don't want Gavin Newsom to be their nominee next time around. Part of the reason that Kamala Harris lost the last election was that California is such a dumpster fire. Why would you want to do that again if you're a Democrat and you want a Democrat to win the White House?
Well, and that's actually what takes us to our first question, which is related to the high-speed rail and the fact that how exactly is it that we can promote politicians from California if California can't get anything done?
Good question.
And so I'm curious, as you look forward, how you view California's place as being able to actually get things done so that it can serve as some type of a test case for people around the country to know that it's not enough to just elect Democrats because they are not Republicans, but to elect Democrats because we're capable of governing and building big things.
We're not.
Yeah, how many examples do you need, buddy?
Things and dreaming up these big ideas and not just getting bogged down in with the intricacies of our own bureaucratic red tape.
Yeah, so look, I think this is where oversight
Is she doing this interview from the bathroom?
Or the minivan?
It sounds like there's an echo as if she's doing this interview from the toilet.
You know, nowadays, you can do very high quality broadcast over Zoom, over Microsoft Teams, FaceTime. There are so many ways if you were doing a remote interview for it to sound crystal clear. And if you happen to be running for governor, you might want to invest in that. But Katie Porter had a 10-year-old laptop and she's doing this from the minivan, I can assume. Or is she doing it from the exercise bike in the kitchen?
No, I think she's doing it from the all genders bathroom.
Little D.
That's your own business.
Yeah, so look, I think this is where oversight in part comes in, something I'm known for. That was a big...
Yeah, you know what her license plate says? Oversight.
Yeah, but the letters she chose, let me tell you, if you're just looking at that license plate from traffic, oversight is not what you read.
No.
I'm sure the email is going to be full of what you think it reads.
I would be surprised if it hasn't already started.
We dabbled with the idea of having a chat room for this show and then thought, what would happen if we started talking about a subject like Katie Porter? And we don't need that on our conscience.
No, that Discord page would go to a dark, dark, dark place almost immediately.
That was a big passion of mine in Congress, and I thought it was something Democrats could have done more of, not just when...
We don't have any oversight here.
None.
Not just when Republicans were in the White House or when Republicans were in the majority, but all of the time. Part of believing that government can accomplish things for good is being willing to do the oversight to make sure it's actually happening. And
Okay, so is there a way to do that besides just saying oversight?
Yeah, why don't you head down to the Central Valley with your whiteboard and your minivan and start oversighting now?
And if it's not, being willing to make changes so it does. First, let me say that our Central Valley, cities like Bakersfield, there are almost 500,000 people. The Central Valley is a hugely important part of California and is the home to so many of our important industries, including agriculture, but also increasingly some of our green energy. And so having that transportation corridor all the way from Los Angeles to San Francisco.
It doesn't exist.
At what point do these people have to align their words with reality?
It would be so simple to openly criticize the current and past administrations who have let this project fester for almost 2 decades.
This is like watching an episode of The Twilight Zone, where you have all of these politicians talking about how great and wonderful this bullet train is, how fast it'll take you from one part of the state to the other, what a smashing success it's been, yet there's no train, but no one's willing to admit it.
The only part of the train they're building takes you from one part of the Central Valley to the other part of the Central Valley, which doesn't do anything to, as they say, get cars off the road or from the federal government that approved this back in 2008 and 2009, get air quality to improve in Fresno.
Walt Disney laid more track in Anaheim in what was that, the 50s, than these people could do now. Now, I do realize he's German, but at some point, someone in that town should be able to get something done.
And so having that transportation corridor all the way from Los Angeles to San Francisco, hopefully we can get it down through Orange County and San Diego someday, is really, really important. But
Paul's going to be a senior citizen before that ever even gets considered.
A senior citizen? What are you talking about? Paul's grandkids are going to be putting flowers on his tombstone.
Paul is really, really important, but it is taking too long. And what that does ultimately is drive skepticism about what...
You mean how California can't do anything?
That's not just skepticism, that's reality.
About whether or not the things that we're paying for, the things that we believe in can actually happen.
Is it possible that in a state with one-party rule that nothing gets done and people just start handing out favors to everybody and incompetence rises to the top?
And how about this? When she was on the oversight committee and she was looking at government, how come the bullet train was never on her radar when she could do something about it?
That's a good point.
And I think the point I take from Ezra's book is that, the things that Democrats have done, the great things that governments, Republican and Democrat, have done, have required an urgency and a commitment to outcome, not just a process that we sometimes are lacking. So look, Trump is threatening to take away the federal funding for high-speed rail. It's another example of an attack on California.
Oh, boy.
Okay, why do you deserve a cent for that railroad that doesn't exist?
That was sold as a project that would connect Los Angeles to San Francisco. That is not what's being built now. It has wasted a ridiculous amount of money over the last 15 years, and they have nothing to show for it.
How did this turn into a Trump is picking on us story?
Well, she knows who the audience is of this podcast.
I guess.
We should fight to get that funding. But we also need to have a governor who's going to hold everyone accountable.
There's our favorite word.
Okay, if she's elected to be governor, you think for 1 second Donald Trump is going to give that woman a cent?
Accountability, accountability, accountability.
She'll get in that minivan, that gross polluting minivan, and drive all the way to Washington, D.C., drive right through the front gate, park the minivan on the lawn, get out of it, wearing a house dress, start banging on the front door demanding money for a train that doesn't exist, and you think for 1 second they're not going to remove her with mace?
No! To get that project done on time and on budget. That reality.
It's not doing either of those things.
Nope.
To get that project done on time and on budget. That reality is that has not been the case. And so if we're going to build political will for the things that we believe in, whether that's environmental things, green energy projects, transit, more housing, after school care, then we have to make sure that we're getting them done quickly. And I think a lot about the Biden administration with this and the Inflation Reduction Act. Some pieces of that rolled out really quickly, right? Like the grants to chip manufacturers. Right. Other pieces, like the the rebates that people were supposed to be eligible for, administered through the states when they bought home energy appliances. Not one of those programs, not one of the 50 states.
Oh, good on her for criticizing that nonsense. Or the Internet for Everybody program that gave internet to nobody.
But again, she was in Congress when all that was happening. Why didn't she do something about it?
I thought her middle name is Oversight.
States rolled their program out, to the best of my knowledge, before Biden was out of office. That's too slow. And so I do think sometimes Democrats get too into being administratively process perfect, exactly fair, balancing every single possible equity and concern.
No. That's not what's going on here. The reason that the bullet train is taking forever is because of all the graft that's going on. All of the termed out politicians sitting on the board, everyone wanting to get their piece of the action. That's what's important. Go back to that interview that we played last week where they said, stop looking at it like it's a transportation program and look at it like it's a jobs program. They're all feathering their own nest, and that's the reason that it's not completed. The actual train being operational is not the goal. Everyone making money and them rewarding all of their friends, that's the goal.
Perfect, exactly fair, balancing every single possible equity and concern at the expense of delivering for people. And I do think that that's an important point, and we have to keep that in mind as we lead forward. Democrats need to have our democratic states and our democratic cities be centers of excellent government.
Okay, go get the wand. At a certain point, I don't know exactly when this happened. Maybe it's with the proliferation of public employee unions. But back in the old days, you look at a New Deal Democrat. You look at someone like FDR or the Democratic members of Congress when FDR was president. They cared about these government programs because they wanted the government programs to produce services that would benefit the people that they cared about, which back then were people who were suffering in the Great Depression. And at a certain point, the benefit of the people that you claim to care about, them getting services delivered by the government, that's no longer the priority. The priority is taking care of the people who are supposed to be delivering those services, whether it is the government employees, the politicians, the people who sit on the boards and commissions, whatever the case may be. That's who they care about. That's who they're trying to take care of. And the people who are supposed to be benefiting from the programs are not relevant to their conversation.
Because that is going to be part of our reputation and our ability to win in swing areas, whether it's here in those Democratic states like Orange County or swing states in New York, or whether it's across the country where we can win in Republican states.
So it's back to national politics.
We have to show how great we are at governing, except we're not.
And we're not even close. We're the laughingstock of the country. Did you see that Mississippi and Alabama just passed us in education?
I did. That is so embarrassing.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, we got a lot of response to our interview last week with former San Francisco Mayor Willie Brown. If you missed Mr. Mayor and you want to go back and find out what he had to say, that's easy to do.
All you got to do is search for The John Phillips Show wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's the Apple Podcasts app, iHeart, Spotify. Search for The John Phillips Show. Hit subscribe. You can download all the episodes, including our interview with Willie Brown.
He gave us a few of those laughs, too. That man delivers. In the meantime, what do you say we make a couple of listeners very happy?
Well, let's do that right now. 790 KABC welcomes Brian Adams with special guests Pat Benatar and Neil Girardo. It's all happening at the Kia Forum on November 18th. Tickets are on sale now at Ticketmaster.com. But right now, caller number 9 at 1-888-790-5222 gets a pair of tickets to the show. Tickets furnished by Live Nation. Good luck dialing.
We got a lovely email earlier today from listener Patricia who said, want to thank you and AM 790 for a fabulous night at the Greek this past Saturday night. Billy Idol can still sing, and Neil Young may look homeless, but he can still rock. And then she sent us pictures, too.
How great. We need to start giving away stuff on KSFO, too.
For sure. If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Well, Johnny, as you know, anytime we do a topic about Katie Porter, the emails come a-blazing. And while some of them are very funny, I don't necessarily feel comfortable reading them in my own voice. But thanks to the magic of AI, I can have Queen Elizabeth read this email from Cammie.
It sounds like Katie is calling from her bathroom while laying a democratic deuce.
Such a classy woman. And you put those words in her mouth.
Please.
800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. Let's go back to Katie Porter with Brian Tyler Cohen.
Let's hear what she has to say about rebuilding after the fires.
A lot of the red tape and processes that are currently on the books that make building housing slower in California were discarded in deference to speed with the rebuilding process in the Pacific Palisades, for example. And so is there a world in which that can be a more across-the-board tool that we can use to promote building housing in LA and across the state more broadly?
Yeah, so with regard to wildfires, look, some of this comes from climate change. We know that, and we have an administration that's going to take us
Oh,
back.
God. This is what we're going to get out of her? There was no water in the fire hydrant.
Do you see, by the way, that that reservoir is going to be dry for another few months because the lid still has a crack on it?
Boy, that climate change is a bitch.
Back on those efforts, but we also need to make our utility providers, make them spend the money to invest in wildfire prevention. That means putting more of the electrical lines underground. That means doing the maintenance that can help prevent it. It means having early warning and detection systems.
It's interesting that she's talking about this because Gavin just signed an executive order a few months ago that pretty much lets PG&E off the hook from having to do that.
Yeah, where was the oversight there, Katie?
And so utilities and their shareholders need to bear those costs, not customers, not taxpayers.
That's funny, too, because the California Public Utilities Commission just allowed SoCal Edison to recoup all of their costs from all the payouts from the Woolsey fire 7 years ago from ratepayers.
And how much were taxpayers on the hook for when we bailed out PG&E after the campfire?
Quite a bit.
but utilities and their shareholders. They've reaped the profits of providing electricity, and they need to bear the costs of doing that. That cost includes wildfire prevention.
Let me interrupt just to ask a quick question on that. What if they just altogether decide it's not the juice isn't worth the squeeze, and they're just going to pull out of, and they want to just pull out of the state entirely? We've seen insurance companies, for example, refuse to even offer their services in places like Florida.
Yeah, so look, I think utilities are a little different than insurance companies because of the amount of infrastructure that they own and have. So it's not as easy to pick up and cart off. But of course, we want utilities to be able to make a profit here. They're not going to provide this service if they don't make a profit. That's why we have regulation about utility costs. The question...
No, we don't. We have a CPUC that rubber stamped 6 rate hikes for PG&E in 1 year. And then PG&E was so brazen this year, they said this time we want a rate hike just to increase our shareholder dividend.
You know what's crazy is that if there's going to be any subject where you could actually get some action out of her, it would be something like this, because she loves to regulate. But she got so drunk on the MSNBC high from getting booked on cable news to go after Donald Trump, to go after the Trump administration. That's all she cared about. And sometimes some big corporate CEOs that would testify in front of her committees. That's all she cared about. Whereas if she had any interest in what was going on in California, she could have used her perch in Congress to really try to make life better for the people who live here. But she was motivated by getting bookings on cable news, so those were the subjects that she spent all of her time on.
That's why we have regulation about utility costs. The question is, when we give those utilities their share of the profits, and they have made profits, what are they doing with that money? They need to be
Well, if it's PG&E, they're buying ads telling you how great they are at safety.
Who's buying that?
They need to be reinvesting a portion of that profit into making sure that they can continue to operate successfully in the future, not just making sure that they're delivering short-term shareholder profits. That's true, by the way, for every business. We need to make sure businesses across the country are putting their money, their earnings, into creating the next generation of jobs and resources. The homeowners insurance challenge is going to be big, and the next governor of California is going to have to work on this.
Well, the current one didn't.
No, the current one's an absentee landlord.
We need to make sure that we can make it profitable for homeowners insurance companies to be here. How are we going to do that without raising rates? Because Californians can ill afford higher expenses right now.
Boy, she's talking right out of the Ricardo Lara playbook.
Yeah, and who did you endorse for insurance commissioner, lady?
And so this is something where we're working on thinking about concepts of reinsurance, making sure there are backstops. One of the problems with fire is it's very, very regional, very, very geographically intensive. And so we need to be able to spread that risk. And I think the state can be part of figuring out how we can
spread that risk means jacking up the rates for people that don't live in fire zones to pay for people that do live in fire zones.
Meaning everyone in the state of California will see their premiums go up.
That's equity.
State can be part of figuring out how we can do that. On your last point about rebuilding in the palace.
Boy, as soon as she gets asked about policy, it's not looking great for Katie Porter.
Well, and by the way, this is the main difference between what's going on in Florida and what's going on in California. In Florida, you can buy insurance. All of these blue chip companies are still selling policies in the state of Florida. It's expensive. It'll cost you a lot of money, but you can buy the policies, and it's based on the risk. In California, we can't buy policies from certain blue chip companies like State Farm and Allstate, and I'm sure the list will get longer. And what's going to happen is they're trying to spread the risk. They're trying to spread the cost increases statewide as opposed to just the people who live in the areas that are in severe fire risk areas, severe danger.
On your last point about rebuilding in the Palisades, rethinking the kinds of procedures that we use when we require housing. Yes, we are seeing not just when there's been a wildfire, but also efforts in our state legislature to try to make it faster to build housing.
And they haven't worked.
Nope.
infill housing, for example, exempting that from some kinds of environmental review, some kinds of permitting.
Actually, what we usually exempt from environmental review is fancy stadiums. Steve Ballmer gets whatever he wants in this state, including having an exemption to have the only establishment in the state of California that can have last call at 4 a.m. He got a whole bill written for his VIP lounge at the Inuit Dome in Inglewood.
I wonder what Bernie Sanders would say about that.
Exempting that from some kinds of environmental review, some kinds of permitting. I think we need to be pursuing that across the state for all kinds of housing. We need workforce housing here in California. We need housing.
You mean like the housing that you're taking up at UC Irvine?
Yeah, she doesn't even pay for her house.
At what point does she have to give that up now that she's running again for another statewide office?
You'd think sometime soon.
For all kinds of housing. We need workforce housing here in California. We need housing for our college students desperately. We need housing for our aging population. And so I do think we need to figure out how we're going to build that housing. Part of that is about supply and building more and bringing price down. And part of it is about public investment in making the cost of building cheaper. That could be through things like incentivizing the use of more modern materials, building housing that's going to use less electricity, making investments in the utility structures that housing needs.
You can have this house, but no air conditioner. It uses up too much power.
Making investments in the utility structures that housing needs to bring down the ultimate cost. So it's not an ideological issue. We are seeing progressives and environmental champions push for the faster building of housing and for just examining whether our environmental laws are actually serving their purpose.
And this is what many members of the Assembly and State Senate have said for years and years and years. And Gavin will say, I've made 50 reforms to CEQA, and nothing that they have done has actually sped up how difficult and expensive it is to build in this state.
Nope, not one iota. Right now, we're listening to former Orange County Congresswoman and candidate for governor Katie Porter with Brian Tyler Cohen.
You can't do a Katie Porter for governor interview without asking the Kamala question.
And finally, let's finish off with this. I usually don't give a about horse race politics, but
I had to put that bleep in.
Potty mouth.
And I'm lucky that I previewed the sound during the break because I forgot about that one. It is driving me crazy how many podcasts I have to edit swears out of for AM radio.
Well, and it's not just the podcast. Every time a politician is on the stump, it's F this and F that.
If the politicians are saying it, I think at that point it's public record.
Horse race politics, but I am curious how the potential entrance of Kamala Harris, if she does decide to run for governor, how that would impact your campaign, or if it would have no impact on your campaign at all.
Yeah, look, I mean, Vice President Harris is going to be a tremendous factor of force in whatever she chooses to do next. And so she hasn't made her decision yet, whether she's going to return to national politics, whether she's going to run for governor, whether she's going to do...
Can we do neither?
Yeah, that's an option, actually. An option that she should consider.
I will repeat myself.
For governor, whether she's going to do something else. I'm very confident knowing her.
Girl, travel. There's a whole world to see. Get on one of those 4-month cruises.
For governor, whether she's going to do something else. I'm very confident knowing her well that she's going to be a tremendous force for good in whatever she chooses to do.
Based on what track record?
What planet is this woman living on?
In whatever she chooses to do. I think if she enters this race, given her name recognition, given her history of being our attorney general, she would be a formidable candidate.
Most people don't know who our current attorney general is.
And he's finding out the hard way.
Attorney General, she would be a formidable candidate. I think every candidate, including me, is going to have to be aware of what that name recognition, what that fundraising potential is. That said, I am doing everything I can to make sure that I am centering on winning this campaign. She has not entered the race. She's not made a decision. And she said it may be many months until she does so. In the meantime, Californians are very, very eager to think about what do we need to do to withstand Donald Trump? What do we need?
That's not the big issue facing California, Katie.
No, and what's weird is they're all kind of half campaigning. They made their announcement. They went on Alex Michelson. Some of them are doing other shows, but not many. They're not campaigning around the state. They're not gobbling up endorsements. They're not doing the things that candidates typically do.
It's pretty much we're in the race, but let's see how the summer goes.
To think about what do we need to do to withstand Donald Trump? What do we need to do to bring down costs? And our governor's going to have a huge role to play in that. I think everyone is seeing how much states are going to absorb and have to react to the brunt of what Trump does, how much our states are going to be there to kind of buoy us up, both in terms of values, but also in terms of actual social services and support. So I think people are eager to begin talking to their future governor, to begin hearing their ideas.
So you getting out there?
Here's what's weird. How do you ask someone for money if you're running for governor and your position is, I'm the person most qualified for that job unless Kamala Harris gets in, then that's her? Who is going to open up their checkbook? And, oh, yeah, I'm in the race and I'm in it to win it and I'm not going anywhere unless Kamala Harris jumps in and then I might drop out.
I don't see how you spend any money on any of these candidates. And some of them announced almost a year ago, like the two Tonys, Tony Atkins and Tony Thurmond. Where are they? Are they even campaigning for this job anymore?
No. What we're doing is we're on path to have Eleni Kounalakis, if Kamala Harris doesn't get in, as the likely governor in California because she's a billionaire.
There's going to be a lot of Eleni ads.
For Californians.
That's all you're going to hear. It's going to be Meg Whitman 2.0.
I'm certainly benefiting from having had this.
Has she been nice to the maid?
I don't know. I'm sure we'll find out, though.
I'm certainly benefiting from having had this time to listen to people, to meet with people, to tour businesses, to listen to workers, to nonprofits. And so I'm going to make every use.
Oh, of course. That's what we really need is someone listening to the nonprofit sector.
And when I think of Katie Porter, I think of a strong listener.
And so I'm going to make every bit of use of this time all the way through the primary, which is about 13 months from now in June, to make sure that I'm raising the resources and earning the votes and trust of Californians.
But you're not really campaigning.
No, she's not. And none of them are. I guess Steve Hilton is and Chad Bianco is. They're Republicans, so whether or not Kamala Harris getting in the race won't impact them that much. But I really don't know what these other clowns are doing.
Where's Antonio lately?
He's in the witness protection program. Why not run for some other office where you can plan and you can raise money and you can campaign? If there's a real good chance that you're going to drop out of the race, why are you wasting your time? For Katie Porter, I think it's a little bit different. There's really no place for her to go. I guess she could run for attorney general, but Rob Bonta is running for re-election, and he's not in prison yet.
Yet being the strong word on that one.
So she can't run for that office. Another Democrat, DUI Dave Min, he won her old seat in Congress, so she can't run there. She ran for Senate and lost. There's nothing left for her other than running for governor, but that's a job that involves duties that she doesn't care about. So I don't know. I guess she wants to find something to do so she doesn't have to go back to teaching.